Hi everyone and welcome to Global Azure Norway. My name is Torstein Nikolaisen and I'm part of the Norwegian .NET user group who are organizing this event today. And I will be your host for this session. And without further ado, here's our speaker for this session, Jonah Anderson. The stream is yours.
Yes, hi, thank you. Hi everyone, thank you for tuning into our session today. And today I will be talking about Microsoft Azure Service Bus, an introduction for it, and a technical overview that is useful even for the beginners of this technology. And let me start by introducing myself. Who am I? I am Jonah Anderson. I am a software developer at Forefront Consulting, an IT consulting company here, based here in Sweden. And on my work days, I code full stack development, mainly in C Sharp .NET, and also enjoy developing technologies in Microsoft Azure. And during my free time, I like to do voluntarily mentorship in several women in tech community here in Sweden and internationally. And I also like sharing knowledge about Azure and gender diversity. I am a founder of a new local user group called Azure User Group Sundsvall. And on my free time, I like reading books, spending time with dog training, my Belgian Malinois, and also play some chess. So if you like playing chess, you can ping me and let's play. And let me start my talk by sharing you a bit about communication. So communication is a very vital rule, is very vital today, especially in the times of COVID or Corona, where everyone has to communicate and collaborate online. So communication is important because it is critical. It can be critical and it can be prioritized. But my point here is that there are two types of communication: one-way and two-way communication. Both of them are important, but depending on the priority of it, we don't want to be getting this error message, failure message. It's because sometimes we need to send important message, and sometimes we need to send a one way message that doesn't require any response right away. And but sometimes we need to get a response right away, and we don't want to end up like this a man who broke his computer because he didn't get his message sent, and probably he's also having his last minute time on a Friday at work. So my point here is that we are hoping that in this session you will be able to learn the basics and fundamentals on how Microsoft Azure Service Bus can solve your cloud messaging problems in your applications. So my plan for today is I will be sharing the basic what Azure Service Bus is, the features, what is a namespace, Service Bus queue, what's the difference between Service Bus queues and Azure Storage queues, and also topics and subscriptions, which is one of the Azure Service Bus feature. And hopefully, if time permits, at the end of the session, I want to share short demos and some learning resources. So, Microsoft Azure have a lot of services, many services that are great, and there are also a group of cloud messaging services that are available for us in Microsoft Azure. And these are the known as of date are the cloud messaging services that are available for Microsoft Azure users. And what we have here is we have the Service Bus, we have the Event Grid, Event Hubs, Azure Relay, we have Queue Storage, Azure Signal R, HD Insight, Notifications Hub, and also the Azure IoT Hub. But today we will be focusing about the fundamentals and some technical basics of Service Bus. And there's a common trend of asking what's the difference between these three. For example, what's the difference between Service Bus, Event Grid, and Event Hubs? So Service Bus is a durable brokered messaging service in the cloud, which means that there's a broker or mediator between the relay of messages from the sender and receiver. While Event Hubs, it's commonly advisable to use it for HTTP event routing and real-time notification. And for Event Hubs, you can use Event Hubs for if you have large scale and massive scalable telemetry that requires buffered storage. So those are, even though the description of the tree are kind of like similar, these are like the key points that we can consider and which one to choose. And so, what is Azure Service Bus? It is a cloud messaging service in Azure that is asynchronous. It is a durable brokered messaging service. It is a brokered messaging service means that your message has a broker, which means, for example, a queue is a broker. Or example is that when you're selling a piece of property to someone, if you're trying to sell your property, you have like a broker. So it's kind of like the Azure Service Bus can be used as a brokered messaging service. And point-to-point messaging means is that you can use the first in, first out method messaging type for queue, in which you have an order of an order or sequence of your messages, and public subscribe messaging feature, which you can have the one to many messaging features like public newsletter subscription. And Azure Service Bus is platform as a service, which means that you as the user of this service don't have to take to worry about the underlying infrastructures behind this service. So the cloud service provider like Microsoft Azure take cares of it for you. And it is fully managed enterprise messaging broker, because you can manage this service directly on the Azure portal, which means that you can have people in your team managing this service without having technical background, because you have everything in one place, like Azure monitoring, statistic, and logs in the Azure portal for this service. So, what are the three main benefits of Azure Service Bus? It's good for load balancing workers, and it is also good for beneficial for data transfer and safety of your data transfer and routing, and coordination of your transactional work. And why do we consider Azure Service Bus? It's because of three word reliability, scalability, and security, which means that you can send a synchronous, reliable message that you can scale, and it is also secured. So, advanced features in Azure Service Bus are used to solve complex cloud messaging problems. For example, message session, first in, first out, which means that you can you can have your messages like the standard first in, first out method, in which you can have them in order. And you also have the feature called auto forwarding that change a queue or a function to another queue or a topic. And in order to do auto forwarding from a queue to a topic, it should those both of them, the queue and the topic, should be in the same namespace. And what is a namespace? I will be going through that in details later. And dead letter queue. Dead letter queue is like a sub queue that is within the Azure Service Bus queue that allows that automatically save the messages that were not delivered to the receiver in a special sub queue. So this feature is good if you want to inspect those messages first, those messages that didn't went through, and handle it later on. And schedule delivery, which means that you can choose which messages that you want to deliver on schedule. So next one is message deferral. So you can choose to defer your message before sending it, and this is ideal for workflows. So this is specific to that. And client-side batching. Side batching means that you will be you have the option, the client side of both the queue and the topic. You have the option to send the messages by batch on a certain time frame. So that is a good feature as well. And filtering in actions. This is specific to topics. For example, you can filter using your SQL filter and correlation filter. So you can filter which messages that you want to send to the subscriber based on the topic that they are subscribed to, for example. And auto delete and idle. So you can assign auto deletion upon a specific idle time or interval. So there are certain scenarios maybe that this is useful in your messaging service. And I think duplicate this detection is also one of the great features of this cloud service, because regardless if we're working with service bus or not, we developers or we that works in the IT world, we don't want duplicates in our data. So I myself as a developer believes in data integrity. And I've also worked with correcting data because of duplication. So because in the past, so I believe that this is a powerful feature to be able to duplicate which messages that are sent to the queue are the same as the previous one. And security protocols. The security protocols provided or supported by Azure Service Bus are a few of them. It supports shared access signatures, role-based, the RBAC, and managed identities for Azure resources. And of course, the geo disaster recovery that we have as in other Azure services in case something happens in our data centers or the downtime. Okay, so next are the supported libraries. Azure Service Bus supports .NET, Java, and GMS, a Java messaging service. Probably there's more other features. I haven't checked the latest supported libraries, but these are the top few of them. And you also have the capability to integrate your service bus with other Azure services like the Event Grid, Logic Apps, Azure Functions. So in Azure Functions, there's a service bus queue trigger, and there's also a topic trigger. So you can make your service bus serverless as well, and it can be integrated with Dynamic 365 and Azure Stream Analytics. And as for the security protocol, these are the protocols that are used by Azure Service Bus. It's the Advanced Message Queuing Protocol, the HTTP, and the SMB Service Bus Messaging Protocol. The namespace. The namespace is vital in Service Bus. It's like a scoping container for the service bus. As you can see in this example, there's the namespace is like a container for your queue, for example, where your app, which is, for example, a message sender client, it can be a web app, a mobile app, or a service, sends the message into the queue, and that queue should be in a namespace. And in a namespace, you can also have several queues, several topics, and it's your queue that forwards those messages to the message receiver clients depending on when it is retrieved. So it's kind of like store in the queue in the cloud. So creating a namespace is necessary in getting started with this. And as for the basics, practical things like the pricing, When you create an account or set up an Azure Service Bus in Azure, we have three options, the basic, the standard, and the premium. Unfortunately, the basic is so basic you cannot do both the queues and the topic. But for the standard, which is kind of like good one, you have the option to create both the queues and the topic. And if you want a dedicated capacity, for example, and more other features, you can use the premium. But it has fixed pricing, and you get other features as well, the premium features. And in order to get an idea exactly, or not exactly, but the estimate of how long, I mean, how much you would have to pay for a service bus based on your requirements, business requirements, then I would recommend to make use of the Azure pricing calculator, which allows you to estimate and calculate some of your services, and you can combine it with Service Bus, or if you want to integrate it with Event Hubs or with Azure Functions, you can calculate it in this site too. And so there are two parts of Azure Service Bus. So there's the queue and the topic and subscription. So the first one is the Azure Service Bus queue, and a service bus queue is like it acts as a message broker, where we can store the message from the sender, and then the receiver retrieve it from the cloud. And it is a queue is an entity for storing message, and it is asynchronous. And there is also a service called Azure Storage Queues. And what's the difference between both of them? I mean, what's the difference between them and when to use what? And here are the differences. So, for example, the storage. If you need a great storage like 80 gig, then it's probably ideal to use storage queues. But of course, there are other parameters too. But if you, for example, in Service Bus, it has great features too, like guaranteed first in, first out delivery, the duplicate detections, and the other advanced features that I mentioned earlier. They're also good. So there are certain things, best practices, and technical considerations that are worth checking out in details before choosing Service Bus queues. And I believe the Service Bus queues have more features, like the duplicate detection and the authentication options here. So next is that development. So if you want to get started in developing Azure Service Bus, you would need to have an Azure subscription and an admin role for that. So, and the programming languages that are supported are .NET, Java, Python, JavaScript, PHP, Ruby. And code editor, I see that I misspelled it, a code editor, Visual Studio, VS Code, and some IDE depending on the language that you have chosen to code your service bus with your apps. And depending on what you're creating, queue or topics, you can use Azure Portal, Azure PowerShell, Azure CLI, and ARM template. Topics and subscription, the topics and subscriptions service, I think they only support, I don't think they support ARM template. So it's worth checking which of them are applicable. And as for the Service Bus SDK, there are different versions. For example, the Windows Azure Service Bus was the old version, And the one that is recent and current today, as of today, is the Azure messaging service bus. And this is multi already. So if you're going to start developing with service bus, I recommend that you use the latest version because it has all the updates and the features for this service. And next type of Azure Service Bus is topics and subscription. Topics is a one-way publish subscribe messaging communication model. Just like here, you have a sender, and you send a message, and you have different topics and different subscriptions. And the good thing about the difference between topics and queues is that topics uses it is similar. It's similar to queue because it has a broker. The topic serves like a broker, but the difference is that you can filter the received messages in topics and subscription depending on what the subscriber has topic has subscribed to. So just like the real life example is like when we're subscribing to a newsletter, we only subscribe to the topics that we want to receive in our mail. And if we're tired of it, we can just unsubscribe, and hopefully that works and we don't get too much spam. So it's something like that. I think you kind of got a grip of it. And here is an example, simple scenario for topics. So a web app, message sender, that could be a web app, mobile app, or a service. And any of them can send a message to a topic. And of course, a topic should be in its logical, so in its scoping container, a namespace. And each topic can have different subscriptions. And the receiver can receive the messages based on the subscription or the topic that they're subscribed to. And here is a quick overview of an example that I got on Serverless360.com. It is like everything, the queues and topic in one application or integrated together. It's a vehicle telematics application. It's a booking application for car, I believe. And here is a service bus queue, and this is a topic, and it's integrated with Azure Functions and Event Hubs, Event Grid. So this is an example of a real life use case. And if you want to check the details, it's on this website, serverless360.com. And I will be doing some short demo. Let's see. So the demo is about showing you a bit how it looks on Azure Portal and a few examples of a console app in .NET Core for Service Bus Queue and topic. So let me just switch to my Azure Portal. So here I have a namespace. I have a resource group and a namespace that I created already for demo purposes. It's called Jonah Global Azure Demo. And in here, in order to create the queue or topic, I had to sign up for the standard pricing tier. So if I want to create a queue, I could do that, set a name in that, the max size here, it's from 1 gig to 5 gig. And max delivery count, here you can set from values 1 to 2,000. And the time to leave, you can set here also, the lock duration. And here are the features, advanced features that I mentioned earlier. If you want to enable the auto delete, duplicate detection, did lettering on expiration, and also partitioning. Partitioning is a feature in which you can partition a queue across multiple message brokers, and it can be enabled depending if you have that need in your application. And then session allows you to do a session or work with a session in your queue for first in, first out delivery. And you can also forward, you can also use forward the messages to the queue or topic if you want. And this is how it looks on Azure. So we have the entities here. So I created one entity called Global Azure Demo, Service Bus Demo Bus Queue. And here right now, I have the special part of this queues interface or dashboard right now is for the demo purposes is the message count. So since I haven't set up any scheduled and dead letter features in my application yet, we gonna focus on the active messages that is currently on the queue. And I will be showing you the code now. See. So here in my Visual Studio, I have Visual Studio 2019, and I'm using C# as a programming language in .NET Core 3.1. I have several projects here that I'm building and setting up, not yet done, but I have a message queue sender, and in here I have a program.cs, an app config, and a list of names some that I randomly generated. And what I plan to do is that I'm gonna use the Azure Service Bus queue to send a single message to the queue, and also send a greeting message to all the names in this list, in this text file. So I will be reading the data from the text. And let's see. So I have two methods in my main asynchronous main async. I have send message, single message, and I'm also gonna try to send batch message, like several messages or greetings to the people in the name list and welcome them to the event today. So in my send async message, I have a try catch. First, I'm gonna be I will be using the Service Bus client, and here on the top, I'm using the SDK, Azure Messaging Service Bus, the latest that we have as of today. And here I sent my connection string as a parameter in my Service Bus client, and I create an instance for the sender, and sending in my the name of my queue, which we have, which I already set up in Azure Portal, and then I created a hard-coded message to say, hello world, welcome to Global Azure 2021. And I'm gonna save that message as a new, I'm gonna have it as a Service Bus message, which is built in this SDK. And I will have an async, I will be calling send a message async, and log to inform me if that message was sent to the queue. So if we check our portal now, I have 0 active messages, and I will be running this queue sender. And I will just wait for my final message. So it took like 1, 2, 3 seconds, a few minutes, a few seconds. I didn't even had time to switch the console, but I see here I got a note, I got my log that I sent a single message to my queue, and I also sent a batch of 25 message greetings to all the names in this text file to the same queue. So I should be expecting 25 messages in my queue. So if we go to our Azure portal and our service bus queue and click on refresh, here we see that we have 25 messages that are active, and these messages are going to stay on the cloud or stay in the queue until we have a receiver client that retrieves it. So what I have here is another application called message sender queue sender message queue receiver, and it is also a simple one. I have a connection to a connection string, and I also set my queue name, and I only have one method for the receiving. It's to receive the messages async. I'm gonna get all of them at once. And here I also use the service bus client, and this time it's kind of different. I use the service bus processor and sends in my queue name and the service bus processor options. And in my options, I can add in the message handler, a handler to process the messages, and also a queue error handler to handle the errors. And when it's done, it's gonna start processing and log it. But I will go into how the message queue handler looks like. So it calls the method complete a message async to delete that message from the queue once it's already retrieved or received by the receiver client application. And if something goes wrong, and then the error handler handles it and complete the task. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna start this queue receiver, and what it should be doing, the receiver client should be printing out the messages from Azure, and it's my computer is hanging. Wait, let's see. Let me try. Let's try again. It should work in my computer, otherwise it's not working. Wait. There. So here, I hope you see it. So here are the messages that I got, I retrieved from the Azure Service Bus queue. So so it's printed, and I can handle it in my application in any way I want. And if we double check how the count of the active messages, we will see that this one should be gone here. It should be 0. So here we can see also the metrics of the event, or what was happening through Azure monitoring in one place. I think my Azure is longsome or slow right now. Okay. But anyway, well, it's before I show you how it looks on the logs. So that was an example of a message queue, receiver, sender, and receiver. And I wanted to show you also how to code the topic sender. So if we're gonna implement the topic feature, so you would need your Azure's Service Bus connection string and the name of your Service Bus topic. And here I created method to send a single message to a topic, and also the same way as I did with the queue, as multiple batch of messages from the text file. And the difference here is that you actually use the difference here is that you use the you use the service bus client, and you use a sender class to send the message to the topic. And if you send it by batch, for example, if you send multiple messages as to the topic, you would need to create the messages and also start a batch, an async batch, and you can use the method called try add message if you want to do some error handling and make sure that you don't get an error. So it's good to have try add instead of just adding the message. And in case something happens, then you can log the error, and also the topic also keep there's a while loop that keeps checking if there are messages that are still coming in the topic queue. So, and let's see, and the receiver also looks like this. It has the service bus processor, and it also has the handler and the error handler. So just like the queue. And let's see if my Azure is already working. All right, so here you can see the different monitoring that you can make use of if you want to look for data that you want to have for your Azure Service Bus. And let's see. What else? There's also an Azure Service Bus Explorer that is currently in preview, that you can actually send a test message from the Azure portal. For example, if I'm gonna say hello globe, and see and send it. It's like a user interface without a code. You can receive it, and then you can choose if you want to perform a destructive receive, or you can pick it. And here, when I receive it, you will see the message, hello global Azure, and some of its broker properties that you can also use to handle advanced features, and that should be gone in the queue. So that's all about my demo today, and I hope you learned something. And this is just the demo that I showed is just like the basics one that can be useful especially for the beginners or developers that are getting started with Azure Service Bus. But Microsoft has a great documentation about Azure Service Bus, how to quick start, the basic concepts, and the languages that are supported, and how to use it with PowerShell and Azure CLI. And I also challenge you to take the Microsoft Learn modules learning path for Azure Service Bus. And some GitHub examples, it's in Microsoft Azure's GitHub for Service Bus. And there are links here and how to like information and comparison with the different messaging services aside from the one that I mentioned. And so, to summarize, you have learned the basics and technical concepts of Azure Service Bus, and hopefully, it will help you get started and learn more and improve or develop it more in your apps, in your applications. And hopefully, you won't be able to get frustrated and be happy like this man after he received his message because of the help of Service Bus. And if you need to contact me for a copy of the code or just the presentation, feel free to scan this code. And thank you so much, tack så mycket, and thank you so much for Global Azure for having me here today. And also, I would like to share this swag or learner badge. So feel free to scan this code if you want to get your learner badge for attending this session today. 30 days to learn it enabled is also a good resource, and check out the links here as well. And tomorrow I will be doing a lightning talk about how I use Microsoft Azure for continuous learning and development. So if you have time in the Philippine session tomorrow, you can also check it out. So that's it. Thank you so much for listening.
All right. Thank you very much, Jonah, both for the great session and contributing to Global Azure Norway. I think that was a great session, and I found it really informative. I think it's a great kind of entry-level introduction to Service Bus for those that want to kind of get started. We are now in the Q&A session part of the session, so let's see if there are any questions. No, doesn't seem to be any questions, so your presentation was obviously crystal clear. But I have a couple of questions that I'm wondering about. First one is, what's your favorite and least favorite thing about Azure Service Bus?
Yeah, that's a good question. The my favorite part was the dead letter queue, the feature that if something happens or if you cannot deliver the message, there's that sub queue that's available that you can later on handle. Who knows, you might have missed a special or important message that you want to handle later on. And the next feature that I want is the next feature that I like is the duplicate detection. That's also good. And the disadvantage or the negative part is that I cannot come up with something, but I wish that aside from the Azure Service Bus queue trigger, I wish that there is a way to fully integrate Azure Service Bus with durable functions. So I'm kind of working on finding a way to do that, because I also believe in the power of serverless, and Service Bus is a platform as a service, and serverless is function as a service. You see the conflict there. So it's kind of like I'm trying to find a way, if there's a way to use Azure functions with the durable functions. And Service Bus with the durable functions.
I have another question. You mentioned that when you kind of send messages to Azure Service Bus, it kind of saves them. Are you charged for Azure keeping those messages while they're waiting to be processed?
You are not charged for the storage of keeping those messages, but there's a limitation or a limit for the number there's a limit for the messages for that. So, for example, the number of message capacity depending on the subscription. So if you go beyond that limit, then you can be charged for that. For example, if you go beyond the limit of the basic or the standard. So that's it. But
Okay.
basically you don't get charge for storage.
And a final question. Do you know if it's possible to migrate Azure Service Bus namespace to another Azure subscription?
Yes, it is possible to migrate the Azure Service Bus namespace to another subscription, and you can use or do that using Azure Portal, or you can also use the Azure PowerShell commands. And to know the exact details of the command, the Azure PowerShell commands, it's actually in the documentation as well. So it's possible.
All right. I'm not sure if there are any more questions now.
I think we have I'm on the stream as well. There's someone.
Yeah. Håkan, can you pose a question? Yeah. So the question is, I'm new to IT world and trying to pick up a programming language. Which programming language do you recommend to start with? Or which programming language has the least learning curve?
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Interesting question. Yeah. Thank you, Mitish, for your questions. Yeah, I like inspiring people to go to tech. But to answer your question, it really depends. For me, I'm a Microsoft developer, so I prefer a C Sharp, and I also like Microsoft Azure, which is perfect with the Microsoft environment. But picking the right programming language, it really depends on what you want to work with. For example, if you're new to programming and you want to work back end or front end, then I suggest that if you want to work with front end, then research the top front end development languages that are on trend today, as well as the back end languages. So you can do that. But if you want to work full stack, then it's good to learn the basic of both. But it is enough that you master one language, and it will be easier to master other languages. So just keep learn by doing, and don't give up if you suffer, if you encounter some complex problems, because it's just a way to learn new things and improve as a programmer. So I hope that it inspires you or answers your question.
Right, a good answer. So I think that was our last question. So I think we'll start preparing for our next session.
Yes.
That session starts in about 10 minutes. That is 6 o'clock sharp Norwegian time. And we will then hear Katrine Wilhelmsen and her presentation named Pipelines and Data Flows, Introduction to Data Integration in Azure Synapse Analytics. So I'll see you all in a little while. And again, thank you, Jonah, for a great talk, and goodbye.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second session of the second day of Global Azure Norway. My name is Torstein Nikolaisen, and I'm part of the Norwegian .NET user group who are organizing this event. And I will be your host for this session. And without further ado, here's our speaker for tonight, Katrine Wilhelmsen. The stream is yours.
Thank you so much, Torstein. And welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into my session about data integration in Azure Synapse Analytics here at Global Azure Norway. I'm super excited to be part of this event, and I hope you're enjoying all the great sessions that we have. My name is Katrine Wilhelmsen, or Catherine Wilhelmsen. I work as a senior business intelligence consultant here in Norway for a company called InMeta, where I'm also a cloud evangelist. I get to talk about Microsoft and Azure. And because I like to talk about that, because I like to do sessions like this and I blog, I've been awarded the Microsoft Data Platform MVP Award since 2015, which is very fun. You can find me on Twitter at Catherine W, and I blog on catherinew.net. Just please notice there's no E in the middle of my name, even though I have the American accent. That's the Scandinavian spelling, so don't go and bother that poor Catherine W with all your SQL questions. Enough about me. Let's talk about you. Now, unfortunately, I can't see any of you. You're sitting behind your screens and I'm sitting in front of my screen. Otherwise, I would have asked you to, raise your hand so I could get to know you a little bit better. But just entertain me for a little bit and just pretend that, you're one of these people that I talk about. So maybe you're working with data warehousing or big data analytics, or maybe you get to work with some of the cool, shiny new stuff like machine learning or AI. Regardless of what you do, all of these things have one thing in common, and I'm sure you can guess what it is. It's data. Data, data, data. We all need data and we want all the data. And we want this data because we want to know what has happened in the past. We want to analyze that. We might want to predict what's going to happen in the future. Or maybe we just need to figure out patterns and anomalies and detect those things. Most importantly, we want to get insights from our data. We want to understand why things happened. But to do all of that, it requires a fair amount of work to actually get the data in the shape that we want. So there are quite a few things that we need to do. We need to ingest the data or collect it, grab it, extract it, whatever term you want to use for that. We need to store it somewhere that we can access it from, our entire organization. We might have to transform the data and reshape it, or maybe we need to integrate different data sets into one shared data set. Or maybe we just need to prepare it a little bit so we can serve it to our end users. There's a lot of things that we need to do just to get started with actually getting insights. And that's where Azure Synapse Analytics comes in. So for the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to cover three main topics. First, I want to talk a little bit about Azure Synapse Analytics, what it is and what you can use it for and who should use it. Then I want to go a little bit more into the data integration side and understand when it's appropriate to use the different kinds of data integration offerings that you have. And finally, we're going to look at how you can do this. And that's the main topic for my session here today, pipelines and data flows. What are they? How do you use it? And how does it actually work in real life? So what is Azure Synapse Analytics? I think Microsoft describes it as a limitless analytics service with unmatched time to insight, which explains everything, right? It doesn't to me, at least. So I'm going to try to explain it from a slightly different perspective. Azure Synapse Analytics is an all-in-one platform for your analytical projects. And what Microsoft did was they took all of these different services and offerings that they already had, and they kind of bundled them together into one big package and rebranded that as Azure Synapse Analytics. And within this, you have all of these different offerings, and it has and the fact that there are quite a few things that you can do. So you can do all these different things, but it can also be a little bit overwhelming to get started with it because you have so many possibilities now. For example, you have at the core of Azure Synapse Analytics, you have a data lake. You can use that to store all your data, structured, unstructured, or semi-structured data, file formats, all the things that you want to just get into your Azure Synapse Analytics environment so you can do work on top of that. You might want to reshape your data and transform it into a more relational format like data warehousing. And that's kind of where Azure Synapse Analytics sprung out from. It was previously called Azure SQL DW or SQL Data Warehouse. But this is only one part of the offering right now. So if you've heard that Synapse Analytics is a data warehouse, it's correct, but it's also much more than that. But at the core, you still have that SQL engine. You still have that data warehousing engine and the full SQL offering. So you can do analytics by using SQL. And this is really, really cool, in my opinion. So I can write SQL. I'm used to writing SQL. It's a language I know and that I use every day. So I can use that to actually query my data both in a data warehouse, which I could before, but also in my data lake. And that's kind of a new feature. That's one of the serverless offerings that you have. If you're coming from a different world, if you're more familiar with writing other kinds of code or you're familiar with Spark beforehand, they also have brought in the Spark engine inside of Azure Synapse Analytics. So regardless of your background, you can now work from the same interface on the same data, but using kind of the language of your choice. So for me, who knows SQL, I can use that. If you know Python, for example, you can use that. But we can still collaborate within this platform, which is really cool. And then the final part, which is what I'm mostly focused on, it also has an offering for data integration. So you can ingest that data and transform it, and you can choose whether you want to write code or no code. In my session today, I'm going to look at the no code alternative. So Azure Synapse Analytics is also deeply integrated with other services and offerings. And this kind of completes the entire story. So you have Azure Synapse Analytics in itself and the interface that you're working with, but you probably want to do quite a lot more in your projects. So it's integrated with, for example, Azure Purview, which is the new offering for data governance and data lineage, data classification, all the things that is kind of a little bit outside of your project, but very important for everything that you do. So these two products have been tightly knit together, and they're working across the different interfaces as well. So from within Synapse, you can go and search things in Purview. And that's really cool. That kind of completes the story on having these enterprise analytics solution inside of Azure. You can use machine learning models. So if you have someone working on that, they've deployed it to Azure Machine Learning, you can use that directly in your Azure Synapse Analytics solutions as well to do those predictions and get that kind of insight that you can only get by using those models. There's also something called Azure Synapse Link, which is a direct connection to, for example, Azure Cosmos DB. So instead of having to move data from Azure Cosmos DB, which you frequently use for transactional data, instead of having to copy and ingest and move that data, you have the direct link so you can do analytics on top of that transactional data, which is, again, brilliant. You're saving time and you're getting more of those real-time analytics. And finally, of course, Power BI. Power BI is huge. It's very tightly knit with Azure Synapse Analytics. So if you're storing data in the data warehouse part of it, it's optimized behind the scenes without you really having to do anything for using that data within Power BI. And you can also view and create reports in Power BI from within the Azure Synapse Studio. So all of these things are working together to create an overall story for your entire project. And we can see that all of this is built to get people to work together and to work together in one interface instead of having to work on separate tools and separate projects and then, having conversations through another kind of platform. So you can have data engineers like myself working on integrating data and doing all of that. Data analysts who can go in and explore the data that's available, create different kind of queries and look at that data. Data scientists working with predictions, or even just data consumers can get access to go in and look at all the data that you have from within one web browser interface. That said, it can be kind of overwhelming, and there are so many things within Azure Synapse Analytics that you could have. You could have a session on each of these topics. And I've actually attended conferences that are 12 hours of Azure Synapse Analytics content. So if this is interesting to you, I'm happy to talk more about everything else after the session. But let's focus on the data integration part today, which is my favorite. Data integration in Azure Synapse Analytics is kind of split into two, and that's because of what I said earlier with, kind of pulling in those different services. So on one hand, you have all the code-first data integration, things like scripts and notebooks. So if you're coming from a world where you're used to writing a lot of SQL code, you're familiar with that, you can continue to do that. You can do all of your data transformation and integration using, SQL, stored procedures. Or if you're coming from the world where notebooks is a thing, you can also create those in Azure Synapse Analytics. Notebooks is also a very cool offering for all of us in collaborating, because we can have text and we can have code, and it's very easy to see what other people have created before your kind of step in the process. So if that's something that you're familiar with, you can continue to work with those things, and it's easy to kind of port logic between platforms and systems as well. On the other hand, there are a lot of users who are not used to writing code. Business users, business analysts, or coming from smaller enterprises or smaller companies that don't have that skill set already, but they just need to kind of get some data and shape that data the way that they want. And that's where the designer first part of Azure Synapse Analytics comes in. So this is where we're talking about pipelines and data flows for orchestrating and getting the data into your environment, and then reshaping and doing something with that data. And this is going to be our focus for the rest of this session. So data integration in Azure Synapse Analytics, pipelines and data flows. It's the title of my session. What are these things? Pipelines is for orchestrating data, so you can create your workflows, but the main part of that is for copying data, or like I said, collecting, ingesting, extracting, whatever term that you want to use for that. It's getting data from one location, moving it to somewhere else. So in my slide here, you can see we can grab something that's on a website available somewhere and copy it into our data lake. So that's what you would use a copy activity inside of a pipeline for that. The other part is, the next part of that story is when you want to transform your data. So you want to take that raw data and reshape it into, for example, a dimensional model inside your data warehouse. That's where data flows come in. So to go into a little bit more detail on that, let's start at the top. So let's start with pipelines. Like I said, pipelines are what you execute or run. You can run them manually, or you can schedule them to run automatically. And this decides your workflow. It defines what you want to do and in which order. So this is the orchestration part of the data integration story inside of Azure Synapse Analytics. I'm sure that you can think of from your own project or from other products that you've been working with, that main executable that you click play or run on, that's your pipeline. Inside of pipelines, we have activities. So activities are the individual steps that you can run. And these can be chained or they can be run in parallel. So if you have constraints that you need to do something first, like you need to copy the data before you transform it, you can define that by adding that little green arrow in there. You can also do it to handle, if any errors come up, you can handle that separately, or you can choose to run multiple things at the same time. You're in complete control of how you're kind of designing that workflow. And these activities, you have different types of activities. If you're working with copying data, you need to define data sets. Data sets represent data structures like your tables in a database. It could be a single file or it could be a folder of files. That data set is basically just saying that this is the kind of data that we have and this is the general structure of that. And this is what you use as an input or an output called a sink in the solution for your different copy and transform activities. And to actually get that data and to work with that data, you need to connect to a source or a destination. And that's where linked services come in. They work kind of like a connection string. So you define the connection information, how to authenticate, and where you specifically want to connect to. And the data sets are then connecting to the different kinds of services. One very specific kind of activity are the data flows. So they look a little bit different in the interface. You can see that on the bottom of the screen there. And this is where you can define more fine-grained logic. So instead of just copying data from one place to another, you can choose to do all of these different transformations. Maybe you need to join data together. Maybe you need to filter it, reshape it, apply some kind of logic, aggregate it. All of these different things that you would expect to find in the transformation product, you'll find within the data flows. And you can do that in multiple steps, and it's all visual. I'm going to say that this is, I think this is branded as a no-code solution, but it's more like a low-code or designer first. It does have its own expression language, so you probably need to be familiar with, some kind of code nuggets in there, but you don't have to figure out what the code is for all the different steps that you have. So it's very easy for anyone to start using and to get familiar with it. And then maybe you want to transition into code later, but you can get up and running very fast.
We have a little question if you have time for that.
Yes, of course.
So Mitesh has a question here.
Yep.
Can you copy data tasks have filters within it, or is it the basic copy task that moves data from source to target without any modifications?
So the copy data task does not have filters if you're thinking of rows of data. You can choose to filter on different files, so you can select a subset of file that you want to copy, but not if you're looking at a data set with the rows. To do that, you do need to go into the data flow transformation or to write some kind of code to filter on the rows.
Right, thank you.
Yep, I hope that answered the question. If not, interrupt me again. So once we have that pipeline and the activities within it that we've defined, we can choose when to run it. So we can choose to run it, on demand by pressing play, basically. We can choose to run it on a set schedule. So, every Monday or every day of the week at different points in time. You can choose to run it in a periodic interval, and this is where you're looking at time slices. So instead of saying, on a weekday and a specific time, you can say that for every 24 hours, we want to load the data within this time box and then load that continuously. Or you can choose to run it if a kind of event happens. So if someone creates or deletes a file in your data lake, it can pick up on that and then trigger a pipeline to handle that in some way. So it's very flexible to decide when to run these pipelines. And that said, that was kind of the theory of this. So let's hop over to our web browser, which is our development interface. So I'll switch over to my Synapse Studio. And this is what you can see on the screen here right now. So the first time you open this, now obviously I've created this resource in the Azure portal first and then jumped into that. But once you get started with this, you'll see this kind of this home page or the front page, which is where you can start doing things. This is similar to other kinds of services in Azure as well. So they're trying to tie this interface together. What you see here is kind of the different main offerings that you have within Azure Synapse Studio. So you can do things like ingest data, which is basically creating a pipeline for copying that data. You can do things like explore and analyze, which is where you can choose, you can write scripts to get your data, or you can use the built-in file explorer to preview that data. I also mentioned previously that you have a connection to Power BI, so you can go ahead and visualize that data. If you already have some Power BI data sets, you can go and create reports directly in this interface. And then maybe the most important part to start with is the Knowledge Center. So I think that's where we're going to start. Within this Knowledge Center, this is a great starting point if you're not familiar with the things that you can do within Azure Synapse Analytics. So down here, you can see that you can choose to create samples immediately, browse the gallery, or do a quick tour, which gives you a lot of pop-up boxes. The main part here for me, which I actually frequently use, is browsing this gallery to see different kind of examples of things that you can do. And this is a great way to get into what kind of data do you have, or what different parts is this, and what does it look like, especially if you're brand new to this. So here you can see that we can go ahead and actually start using some of these sample data sets. A lot of COVID and tracking data right now for obvious reasons. But you also have things like, Boston safety data, Chicago safety data, or New York taxi data. These kind of data sets that you can use to start getting to know how to do big data analytics. So if you're interested in that taxi data, for example, you can click on that and you can kind of see what the data looks like. It has a description, and then you can click on the Add Dataset button at the bottom to get a connection to that within your interface. So I'm not going to do that right now, but it's something that you can do if you want to get started fairly quickly. On the other tabs up here, we can look at different examples for notebooks. And this is if you want to do that code first or create your scripts. So in this case here, if I look at the first one, charting and Synapse Notebook, and I click on the preview for that, you can kind of see what the notebook is going to look like. So here you'll see a preview of that with some example code, with some charts, and get a nice overview of all the things that you can do by writing Python in a notebook. So a great way, again, to get started on this. We also have different SQL scripts for doing specific things. So this is also helpful if you're new to this and you're wondering, how do I actually query a Synapse pool? You can open up that and get some of these T-SQL code samples that you can basically just start exploring. And then finally, on the Pipelines tab is where we get to all the stuff that I do for a living. So this is where you can find some of the most frequently used design patterns, things like bulk copying from a database to Azure Data Explorer. Well, maybe that one's not as used, but bulk copy from a database, or doing things like down, where did it go? Here, for example. Generic type 2 slowly changing dimension. And you can see here that this is a pipeline, but it contains a data flow activity. So if you were wondering how to do type 2 slowly changing dimensions in your data warehouse, you're not really sure how that would look like in a data flow, you can just import this one and start from there. And these are also documented. So a very good place to start, and I highly recommend that you start in there and start to look at some of these examples to get up and running fairly quickly. In our demo today, however, we're going to do something slightly different. I'm maybe you're maybe you'll agree with me on this. I'm a little tired of COVID data. I'm not really spending that much time in New York in taxis, so I want to do something that's a little more interesting to me personally. And I like Lego. I like building things with Lego. And there is a service online called Rebrickable, where you can actually go in and create your own Lego sets. You can say that I have, these 5 Lego sets. What can I build based on that? And you can get ideas and inspiration for that. It also has a full database that you can download with all the official Lego sets and all the information around that. And this is basically just a list of CSV files that are compressed right now. And you can see that we are working with some big data in this example. Probably not the right demo to show, how Azure Synapse Analytics is performant with massive amounts of data, but a little more fun to work with. But what we have here is just a set of different files. They're CSV files, but they're compressed. And what we want to do is we want to go ahead and grab these files into our data lake so we can do something else with them. And you can, if you're doing this, a similar use case like this, you can kind of think through how you would want to do that in your solution. Maybe it's super simple, or maybe it's something like I had to do previously where you had to set up, some scripts to get the data or into a file share and quite a lot of different steps. A lot of these things have been simplified within Azure Synapse Analytics. So what I want to do is I want to create a pipeline to get that data and move it into my data lake. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to right-click on a file and copy the link to that file just so I have it for later. Then I'm going to switch into my Azure Synapse Studio. And I'm going to browse back to the home page. You can see we have different pages that we can browse to here. But on the home page, I'm going to click on the ingest part just to show you how that works. And this opens up this copy data tool. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit to hopefully make that easier for you to see. So the copy data tool is like a wizard, and you can go through all the details here on your own, but I'm going to quickly show you how this works. So this says up front that you can use it to perform a one-time or a scheduled data load from 90 plus data sources. So this is where you can start looking, start seeing all the different services and data source that you can connect to. So in my case here, I'm just going to call it copy pipeline and just remove that little suffix that they added for me. Always write a description, just not in demos when you're short on time, but do it in your own projects. So when I click on next, you can see that it's guiding us through the entire process here. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to define the connection to our source. Now, I've already created this connection, so it's showing up in my data store list right here. But I can also click on create new connection if this is the first time I've done this. And this is where you can see all the different linked services or the connection strings that we can use. So you can see we can get data from Amazon, Cosmos DB, and I can scroll all the way down here. A lot of different services, things like Snowflake or Teradata, or services like Xero, if you're working with that. And all of these are configurable, so depending on the source that you have to define how to connect to that, the different kind of authentication, but pretty much everything that you want to connect to is available in here. If not, you can use something like an ODBC connector to connect to something until the team adds a specific connector for that. But in my case, I've already created this connection to that Lego file. I can show you that one. So this is where I have that base URL to the Rebrickable service. And this is basically, it's available for free on a website, so I don't need to do any authentication. It's very simple to just go ahead and grab that file from that website. So that's going to be my connection. And then the next part is to go and specify the properties for the data set. So now I need to go and look at the file itself. So I'm just going to paste that one just to make sure that I don't type anything wrong in here. And we're going to look at the themes file. So the relative URL for that is themes.csv.gzip. And this means that I need to probably do something with that data set to make sure that I can look at the compressed data and so on. But for now, I'm just going to say, okay, get this file, then click on next, and that takes me to the file format settings. So like I said, right now it's a little bit confused because, it thinks it's a text file, but it's not. So I can go ahead and change that by scrolling down and setting the compression type to gzip. When I do that, you're going to see that the preview updates and it's showing me the data that I have. And I can also see that the column headers are not what I'm expecting in here. So I can go ahead and click on first row as header. And it probably doesn't pick that up correctly. So I'm just going to see if I can detect that again. It's going to just reload that data for me. Any second now, hopefully. Oh, it's always slow during demos. See if I can nudge it to do that again. I think maybe I killed it with the big data. All right, we killed it. Let's go back and try that one more time. Let's just pick another file instead, just to see if we can refresh that one. No, I think we killed it today. I'm not entirely sure why this is happening. It might be Synapse being a little bit grumpy this morning. Oh, there we go. All right, let's see if we can try that one more time. Set that to gzip with the header. There we go. Detect text format, crossing fingers. All right, there we go. Perfect. Thank you for sticking with me through this little demo glitch right here. One more time. So now we're looking at a different file, but that's fine. We can see things like the set number, the set name, the release here, and now we're looking at the different Lego sets from that service. So now we can actually go in and live preview data that is currently existing on a web server in a compressed format. And just by pointing to that, we can see the preview of that data from within that file, which is really, really cool. I don't have to download it first. I don't have to unzip it first. All of that is handled by Azure Synapse Analytics, which is very, very cool, as long as it works. Once we have that, we can go to the next step, and that's where we want to define our destination. Again, I have a connection already to the data lake that I have within my Azure Synapse Analytics workspace, and this is called Workspace Default Storage, which is fine. So I'm going to use that one, and I'm going to specify the folder path. So I've already created this Lego folder that I want to use. And then the file name, I used sets this time. So I'm going to call this sets.csv. Once I have that, I need to define the file format on the destination side. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to use mostly the defaults, but I'm going to add the header to the file, and I'm going to choose compression type none. What that does is that during this copy activity, it's going to grab that zipped file from the website, unzip it, and then give me the raw CSV file within my data lake, which is very Very simple, actually. It's just one click for me to define what I want to do. The rest of the settings here, I'm just going to leave as default. On the settings, this is where we're looking at the copy data activity in itself. So again here, a lot of settings that maybe you had to configure it manually in the past, but in this case, just a few clicks within the interface. So I can go ahead and choose here. I'll zoom in on this one. You can do things like skip incompatible rows, skip missing files, forbidden files if you're working with a folder of files, or files with invalid names. These are grayed out now since I'm pointing to just one file. But this particular part here, skip incompatible rows. If you have ever worked with data integration in the past, and especially with flat files and text files, you're probably going to run into an issue where there's a line break that someone entered in a field, and then that line, the data flow or the data integration flow, it just kind of breaks because it gets confused. I'm expecting this to be a new column, but it's not, and then it just breaks. So in the past, I've spent a lot of time handling these kind of errors, and now all I have to do is click skip incompatible rows, and it's going to take care of that for me. I can choose to log all of that as well. So if I'm going to use my default storage again, I can go ahead and choose whether I want to log warnings or everything and where I want to log that. So let's just call this errors, for example. Again, I don't have to create a full solution to handle those things. I just have to select a few boxes and tick those in here. Performance settings, enable staging. If you click or if you hover over that one, it's going to say, do you want to copy data via an interim staging store? So this is what you want to do if you want to load into the data warehouse part. You want to kind of stage that data first. But in our case, we're kind of manually doing that by grabbing those files into our data lake. So in my case, I don't need to enable that in this case. And then the degree of copy parallelism, this is where it also informs you of something very important here. It informs you how you're going to be billed for this. Because in Azure, everything that you do has some kind of cost to it. So in this case here, it's going to use the number of DIUs times the copy duration, and then times 25 US cents. And I'm sorry, I said degree of copy parallelism, but I was talking about data integration units. So you can choose to specify those. I'm going to set this to the lowest setting, which means I'm being billed the least. We're working with tiny data here, so I can do that. If you're working with big data, you might have to scale that up or set it to auto so it can scale up for you. In my case, I always keep it at the lowest until I need to scale up to save a little bit of money. Once we've done that, it's going to show me this summary image of what we're doing. So it's going to graphically tell me that I'm going to copy some data from an HTTP location into my data lake storage. And it's showing me a couple of different properties down here, the task name for the pipeline, and then the different connection and data set names. Now, I don't really like these suffixes that it adds, so I can go ahead and change that directly in this interface just to make sure that it's a little bit easier to read. Source data set is not my favorite as well, but I'll just keep it for now to save a little bit of time. And it shows you with the source and destination as well. A little bit more info, just all the summary. Now, once all of this is done and I click next, it actually goes ahead and deploys this for me and runs it. So I can look at this, it's deploying, it's validating my runtime environment, it's creating the different data sets, the pipelines, and then finally it's running that pipeline. And everything succeeded once we figured out that little glitch earlier, which is great. Now what I can do is I can go ahead and look at the pipeline itself, or I can go and monitor. So if I click on monitor, it's just going to show me this interface here that showed me some of the other demos that I had while rehearsing this session. But the one that we looked at, it succeeded. Actually, not that one. Here we go. Copy pipeline. That was the new one that we ran. So from within this interface, we can see all the things that we can kind of log and track that is also built into this product. So what we can see here is it's still loading the activity runs in here. See if that wants to show up or if Synapse is slightly grumpy today. All right, we'll come back to that. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to switch into the other pane in here and look at the integrate page that we have. And what we can see now is that our copy pipeline has showed up because we used that wizard. It created it for us, deployed it, and now it's available from this interface. So we can look at the monitoring later. But for now, I can open up this one and see what that wizard created for us. And now we can see that we only have that one copy data activity. It's getting data from our source data set, and it's writing it into our destination data set, which I see that I actually didn't rename. My mistake there. But just one single task. And from here, I can choose to do a lot of other things. So I can add many different activities here. I can expand them all so you can see a few of them. I can go ahead and do things like maybe I already have a notebook. Maybe someone else in my project has created a notebook that I want to run after I ingest that data. So I can just drag the arrow and connect those two. I can also click on the align button here to clean it up if you're kind of pedantic on that like me. Or I can use any kind of other activity. I can add more copy data activities. I can choose to add different data flows, and we can go ahead and add some outputs. So maybe if that one fails, we're going to do something else. I'm not sure this data flow here or this workflow makes any sense, but just to show you the capabilities in here. Lots of different activities. You can run things like Azure functions from outside of Synapse Analytics. You can connect to Databricks, and you can do iteration and conditionals as well. So this is related to the question that I got earlier. If you want to, filter some data, you have a filter activity here as well that you can use to kind of use some kind of logic in that workflow. So very basic on the pipelines and the activities. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to discard this right now because I don't want to keep those changes. I'm going to quickly show you one more pipeline that I created that goes ahead and I've set up a for each file activity so I can grab all of the different files from that rubricable service. Inside of that, it's just running a copy file for each of the files that I'm passing into that one. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on debug. You can see that I've specified the different files that we want to copy and run that one to populate our data lake. When I click on debug, it actually goes ahead and runs it, and it's going to go and grab those files. It's not just a sandbox environment or a test environment, but it's just so I can see the output within this development interface instead of having to switch into the monitoring interface that we saw earlier. So what I can see here now is that it's going in and copying all of those files for me. I can click on the input and see, what I'm actually copying here. Lots of different settings. You're going to learn to love JSON code when you're working with this. And I can also look at the details for each of these tasks. So this is similar to the preview that we had earlier. I can see that I'm copying from an HTTP source into my data lake. And all of this information that I wanted to show you in the monitoring interface earlier, we're now looking at it in the debug view instead. So I can see how much data was read, how much data was written. If I'm working with different rows inside of a database, for example, it's going to tell me how many rows I copied, how many rows were skipped, and things like it's calculating the duration, the throughput, and giving me all the details down here. This is built into the box, which is also great because I have previously spent many, many hours on building these kind of logging frameworks for myself. Now I don't have to. So all of this is available in here. And then we can switch into the data view and look at the data lake storage. I can now browse down into my Lego folder, and we can now see that I have all of these different CSV files in here. From here, I can use the interface to preview those files directly and look at the data. So this is where maybe someone else from my team comes in and looks at what's going on here. Is this file relevant to me? Does this file contain the data that I'm looking for? Or I can go ahead and create things like a new SQL script and query that data in the data lake by using SQL, or a notebook where I can use things like Python to look at that. Or I can go ahead and click on New Data Flow if I want to transform that data. I've already done that just to save a little bit of time today. So if I switch over to my develop page here, I can see the data flows that I've already created. So I have one here that I just want to show you. I'm just going to, actually, let's just collapse that one and zoom in a little bit for you here. This is a workflow where I'm taking some data from a file. I'm creating a hierarchy based on that internal file because it's pointing to a parent ID. So I'm just creating a hierarchy here and self-joining that and joining it with the Lego sets. So themes and sets, joining that, doing quite a lot of transformation here. You don't really need to look at all the details, but you can look at the final output. Just going to click on refresh. It's now going to go and read that data, apply all of that logic, and show us the output. So what I've done here is that we can see, manual control set 1 was released in 1986. Maybe some of you have it at home. And then I'm joining in the theme names here. This one wasn't very exciting. If we scroll down to here, for example, theme name, food and drink, secondary theme name, classic, town, and town. So we've just kind of created that hierarchy for us that we might want to load into some kind of data set. Again, I've already done this. I've already run it just to save a little bit of time, but we can now go back to our data view and look at our Synapse database where I've created this Lego set. So if I now go ahead and create a script, we can run that query. And let me just remove this top here. I'm going to get all of the data that we have. And we can see that this has that same shape with the set and then all the theme hierarchies that we built. So from here, another thing that I just want to point out is instead of writing things like a where clause in your SQL, you can also search for things. And maybe you can find one of my favorite Lego sets like Gandalf Arrives, which if you're curious, it looks something like this. That was kind of a whirlwind tour of what it looks like. Just to recap that quickly, I am going to show you the, there we go. Let me see. Let's reduce that one. So we have our pipeline here, one pipeline for copying all the files. I created one for running the data flow activity, which looks something like this. Obviously, I've done quite a lot of work before this session just so I had something to show you. I think in total, this took me maybe 1 or 2 hours to set up, and that was mostly figuring out what I wanted to do and the logic that I needed to do. But again, I don't have to write any code. I could go ahead and do this visually, and then for someone else who's coming in who's new, you do need to kind of look at this to understand the logic, but instead of writing code, you can see it on the screen and kind of get some help with the different branches and joins and so on. So a lot of things that you can do in Azure Synapse Analytics. Just to summarize that for you, I want to go back to the slide deck that I showed earlier to give you again that overview. So we have our pipelines pipelines have activities that you can choose to run in parallel or sequentially. If you're copying or transforming data, you need to define the data sets and the shape of that, like we did. Some data sets were zipped and some were just pure CSV format, for example. And then you have the linked services that define where you want to connect to. So we looked at connecting to the rubricable service, to the data lake, and to that Synapse database that I had already created. And then the one thing that we didn't do was set a trigger for this. I only showed you how to debug, which basically is just an on-demand trigger of running that pipeline. But we could also schedule this to run every day if we wanted to update our data daily. That said, again, one final thing is we mostly looked at the pipelines and data flows and the basics of that today. You can also do the scripts and the notebooks. If you want to dig more into that, I'm happy to share some resources with you and some people who are way better at that part than me. Just let me know and I can share that with you. And that said, after that whirlwind tour, do we have any more questions that had popped up in the chat?
Yes, we do. You have quite a lot of questions up here.
Ooh,
so I'll start.
Not sure that's good or bad.
I think it's good. I'll start in chronological order here. So first one is from Mitesh. Does it cost more to use ADF versus going with the code approach?
ADF versus code approach. That depends what you're comparing it to when you're saying code approach. If you're within Synapse Analytics, everything has a cost and you have different cost models. In some cases, it could be more cost effective to, for example, create SQL queries and stored procedures to run things just on a server instead of having it as an ADF pipeline. But understanding the pricing model is complicated. I do have, I did a session at Microsoft Ignite a couple of years ago on Azure Data Factory pricing. So you can look at my blog if you want to look more into the details on how that works. Or email me and I can explain further.
All right. Next question. What are the authentication modes available other than anonymous?
Oh, so that completely depends on the data store or the service that you're connecting to. I was getting things from a website, so that was anonymous. You can also do things like if you're working with a REST API, you need to pass those kind of credentials. If you're connecting to a database, you can do things like SQL authentication or managed identities within Azure. It completely depends on the data store that you're connecting to. But pretty much everything is supported, and then you just need to figure out what is your preferred way of doing it.
And a related question from the same person. Can we get data through web APIs? Yes,
you can. There is a source that you can get from REST APIs, if that's what you're doing, or this is actually something that I haven't done much myself, but you can get it from all kinds of different sources, APIs, databases directly, or basically what I did was kind of just scraping files off a web server.
All right, one more from the same author. What is the capacity of a DIU?
Capacity. So DIU is kind of an abstract thing, like with everything else in Azure. It's just kind of a number that they put on a set of hardware specifications. So the capacity, I'm not sure it's been explained. At least I can't remember it. But it's basically just saying how much CPU you have available, how much memory you have, and so on. And that is being lumped into these different numbers like 2, 4, 16, and so on. I'm sure it's documented somewhere.
All right, and then we have a few more questions here from Rajashi. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. He says he's a big fan of your explanation and he has 3 questions. First one is, in SSIS, we avoid asynchronous fully blocking transformations. Do we need to take the same approach in Synapse Analytics?
No, so that's one of the good things. In SSIS, which is an on-premises product, you had to think about the blocking things because you were constrained to the memory that you had and the CPU that you had and so on, the hardware limitations. With data flows inside of Azure Synapse Analytics and also Data Factory, what this does is it's being scaled out on a Spark cluster behind the scenes, so you can actually run things in parallel that you could not do and you still can't do within SSIS. So you're getting away of thinking of the blocking. The trade-off for that is obviously that it might be a little bit more expensive to run those big operations, but you can do it in a shorter amount of time. So you kind of have to decide where's the biggest pain point. Is it time or cost for that? But the answer is no. You can do aggregations on big data, terabytes of data, in a very short amount of time because it's being spread out on that Spark cluster and parallelized.
All right. The next question is, what would be your advice to an SSIS developer like me who wants to become an Azure data engineer?
Go to Microsoft Learn. There's an Azure Data Engineer path that will take you through all of these different things that I showed you, all the details on both Data Factory and Azure Synapse Analytics. Or if I can be shameless and self-promote, I've written a 25-part blog series on Azure Data Factory and how to get started with that. So you can go to my blog as well and start working through that one. If not, just try and take a use case that you have from SSIS and see how you would do it in this product instead. It's a great way of learning.
All right, last question then. Is there any training materials from your end on Azure Data Engineering Learning? I think you just answered that, but...
Yes, I did. Self-promotion again, 25-part blog post series going through all the bits and pieces in detail that you can work through on your own. I've written it as part of I have a full day workshop on this as well, but the blog post series is kind of like working through labs on your own whenever you have time. If not, the Microsoft Learn, the paths that they have for the certifications and exams is really good. So I highly recommend reading through that as well.
All right, I think that was the last question.
Yep.
So with that, maybe you can finish your slides.
I can do that. So there was a question yesterday as well, and I'm not sure if the person who asked that in Johan's session is here. But the question there was, do you prefer Azure Synapse or Azure Data Factory? Which one should I use? And will Synapse take over for Data Factory? And I thought that was an excellent question that I wanted to answer in this session as well. So with Azure Synapse Analytics, what I've presented in this session is showing you that it's this all-in-one platform. You can do a lot more with it than just moving data. So if you're working with those kind of projects and you're starting something new, definitely look into Azure Synapse Analytics. If you're only looking for the data integration part of copying and ingesting data between services and you want a simple way of doing that, you can look into Data Factory if you don't need everything else that the Synapse platform offers. So if you're starting from scratch, I would probably use Synapse. If you have the use case for Data Factory and you just need that one, you can pick that one. And since we had a few questions on SSIS, if you want to lift and shift SSIS and migrate from on-premises to the cloud, you still have to use Azure Data Factory. So that's also an important distinction there. Again, like I said, feel free to email me. Go to my blog, catherinew.net/ADF will take you to that blog post series on Azure Data Factory. And all of that is also relevant for Azure Synapse Analytics and the data integration story there. So if you want to learn more, if you want to work through all the things that I showed you on your own, definitely start there. And then I've linked to all of the Microsoft Learn pathways as well. Email me if you have any questions or reach out to me on Twitter. I hope you've enjoyed the session and that you enjoy the rest of the Global Azure Norway sessions. The final thing I think a couple of others have mentioned this as well. If you want to get a learner badger badge, I think it's called, you can scan this code and go to the 30 days to learn it and get all the little fun little bits and pieces for participating in this global Azure event.
All right. Thank you very much, Katrina, both for your session and contributing to Global Azure Norway. I found your presentation to be excellent, and it's always enjoyable to see experienced presenters present. And I think it was a really great guide to kind of getting to map out all of these technologies because they can be a bit confusing as there are both new and old concepts. So that was really great. I think we're done with this session, and I'm done also for the evening. So I would like to introduce our next, or prepare you for our next host, which is Evgeny. And there will be a session now in a few minutes. And with that, I'll say goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Hello.
Hi friends, and welcome back to the second day of Global Azure Norway. So my name is Evgeny, and I'm part of Norwegian.net user group, the organizer of this event, and I will be your host for this session. If you have any questions during the talk, please post them to the chat, and I will include them into Q&A session after the talk. So Matthias Lögberg is our next speaker. Welcome, Matthias, and the screen is yours.
Thank you. Nice. So I will come here and talk about releasing services with love. That's a nice topic to have with you guys. I hope you have enjoyed the previous sessions. I have at least. And let's see how we can do this now. So releasing services with love is all about making sure that you're confident with your release pipeline and your production of services. Today, a lot of things that we do today is more on a service level, and we use much more services than we have in the past. So it's important to have a good, reliable release pipeline, because that will then help you and your team to be more productive and do more fun stuff. That's my experience, and yeah, let's see how I can help today and start bringing some ideas into your pipeline. So who am I? Oops, slideshow. Good. So my name is Matthias Lögberg, as mentioned. I work as a solution architect. I've been a Microsoft MVP since 2017. I work at my own company called DevOps Solutions. And if you want to reach me, you can reach me at social media on anything, and I will try to help you out. I still have some of these materials on my GitHub account. So I will try to update that as well, and I will give you that. Yes. So today I will give you an intro to the setup, because this is a setup I've been using in various cases. So I'm producing some YouTube movies as well, and I've been using the same setup for quite some time, so it's common for me. I will go into that and talk about that, and then we will talk a little bit about the release pipeline that we have, and we will talk about ARM templates. Some of you might be familiar with ARM templates, some of you it's new, and some of you are thinking, why not Bicep? And it doesn't matter if you use ARM or Bicep. Bicep is topology above ARM, so this could be achieved with Biceps as well. We will then talk about something called master templates, which is a concept of linking templates in order to achieve a bigger release pipeline, much more reliable. We will also do a little bit about the functions and functionality inside of ARM that we can use. Some of them is really handy, because a release pipeline is not only about getting code out, it's about making sure we have the appropriate keys, that we have access to things that we need to have access to. It's a lot of things, and the more complex Azure becomes, the more complex your solution becomes, the more you need to automate inside of ARM. At least from my perspective, having a more or less fully automated solution makes things a lot easier, rather than a big document of manual steps that you want to go through. So we will help out on that, and release fully automated. We will do that as well. So we will check out ARM templates. We will look into release pipelines. We will look into how master templates will help out on bringing simpler pipelines also. And we will do a bunch of releases, and we'll do some tests via Postman. And then we will wrap up and have some Q&A. If you have questions, let them go into the chat window. We can bring them up, because sometimes it might be a bit complex. So let's close this PowerPoint, because I got one more slide for you. The rest is just demos and whiteboard. So my setup today, as I mentioned before, this is a setup that I've been using a lot. So I have a API management instance, I have a function, and I have a Cosmos DB. Into this, we have an order API. And on top of this, we also have a auth0 instance that we have a trust. So we have a trust over here. We also have requests going down, and we bring up data all the way back. We got a consumer over here, which will then authenticate, get the token back, and then use the token into the request. Obviously, we have validation, so we will validate that you have a valid token. These things we won't cover today, but it's good for you to know that they are there. What we will cover is that this is called dev, and we have this one in dev. What we will do is that we want to bring in a new API management, a new order API with a trust, back to the same OAuth. So we have the trust, same. We have the function, and we actually use the same Cosmos DB, and that's because cost savings from my subscriptions actually. But we have test and we have test. This is what we want to achieve, and we want to make sure that our end user actually can start using test environment in next one. In this case, we will use the same instance, we'll use the same, so we won't need any new token. That could also be one part of the release, but we won't, as mentioned, that will not be part of this thing. So we will try to get this, or we will make sure that this will work, and we will get orders back in our test environment as well. So in order to do this, we will have in DevOps, we will have a bunch of files. So we will have files. This will be code, and it will be ARM templates, and it will be stuffs. Because when this looks simple on this drawing, I mean, if we talk about releasing this part over here, this looks rather simple, but there's some bunch of supporting functionality as well. We usually have an application AI, application insight. We need some storage account. In our case, we also have a key vault. So these supporting services also needs to go. And we will have a release of that as well. So we'll have an infrastructure release that will cover some shared resources. And then we will have the release for the API and the function. So we'll cover all this in this case. So we have a DevOps with files, codes, ARM templates in the repository. Then we have build pipelines. We have one build for infra, and we got one build for our order API. And we also have release pipelines. So we have a release for infra, and we have a release for order API. Sorry for my writing, but I want to make sure that we get this. So this is my DevOps setup. And in this release, let's go with the colors we used. We used red. Sounds good. We have a dev and the dev. So this is what we have today. We will need to create our test. So our test environment should be created over here. That we need to do because we don't have that. And we will use the same build and the same stuff. Our release, as mentioned, the infrastructure will contain of this master template thing. So let's just look into what we actually have in Azure for now. So in our Azure, we got the resource groups. I have a dev API, we got the dev orders, and we got something called dev shared. So this shared is the infrastructure part I was talking about. So in this one, we have an application insight, a key vault, a log analytics, and a storage account that we can use for different things. We then have the API management instance, which is in the resource group called API. So this is our API management instance. And this is what we have in test. In order to create this, we can just go ahead because I have a folder in here. Let's see if you can see a little bit, at least the infrastructure over here. I have that in VS Code. So in VS Code, if you have been familiar working with ARM templates, you know that they can be really big and really complex, and in the end, be a real mess. So this is why we want to talk about this master template thing. So let's go back to the drawing again. So let's just go down here and let's just talk about master templates. So an ARM master is a template that actually link other templates. So we have a new template file, and we have more. So we can link a bunch of them. And the idea of this is to actually be able to minimize the ARM templates, that we can reuse them and use the same ones over and over again, because releasing an application insight is not very big. Releasing a storage account is not very big. Releasing a key vault is not very big. But the problem is when all of them is combined, it's getting complex and big. So that's when the master template comes in, because then we can actually keep our ARM templates small. So AI template is the template for application insight. So I can just bring in the 101 sample from GitHub or something like that. Then I can just use it, and it's very, very small. As you can see, it's just this part. And I can go to API management, which is a little bit bigger, but still, releasing API management is still not very big. When it comes to this, it's a lot of properties because they want a lot of properties and variables. But in the end, the instance itself is small, at least smaller if you don't have to combine them with everything else. And same goes to log analytics. You can have a really small template and so forth. And in order to get them in, I have a file here called master. So this master template is also a deployment file. One of the things I'm using it for, so I like when things is easy. So from a release perspective, I don't want 500 parameters in. I want as few as possible. Less is more in this case, because naming standards are often repeatable, and there's a lot of things that is repeatable, and we should use, as I mentioned, we should use ARM to help us getting those keys. So keys for Cosmos, we will use ARM to get that. The keys for Azure Functions, we will get that from ARM. We don't want to needing to add those manually. That will just take time and be complex. We're even going to, I'm going to show you, we're even going to go ahead and grant API management access to Key Vault in the release to make sure that we don't miss anything when we actually do the release. So while we're at it, I'm just going to show you. This is a generic template for adding anything as permissions for to Key Vault. So this Key Vault instance will then have this resource, which is an object ID, which you need to get. And as I mentioned, these functions that's inside of ARM. So we can get the resource ID. We just need to have the resource group name. We need to have the resource group type. So this is for API management is API management /service. Me Microsoft.API management. And for websites, it's Microsoft.web/sites, for instance. And then we have the resource name over here. And then we're using the split function, which might be necessary. But then get the version, then we get the identity and principles. Then we get the MSI, you know, the managed identity that is used by this resource. And we get that ID and grant access for that right away to secrets in this case. So secrets is the permissions we're granting in this case. You can add keys and certificates here as well, obviously. And I will add the permissions get a list over here. Good. Let's go back to the master. So master template, in my case, I will use the environment as the only variable in that will change besides using the source token. There is a way of using relative path, but it wasn't when I created this example. So I haven't updated it, unfortunately. But then I will create a shared resource group name. I will do that, as I mentioned before. Naming is repeatable, so I know that regardless, I want to have them nice and the same naming, so that's easy to find them and so forth. So I will just add the environment. That's the only thing that will change in my resource group. It's the only thing that would change in my storage account name. Make sure to use to lower when you do something like this, because storage account only accept lower, and you should probably use a string length as well. Same go for application insights. We just add this AI, and then we got environment, and so it goes. And we also, all these templates, they actually create a URL for my template file. So you can see AI template.json. That's the only difference. And that's pointing to this particular file. So when we come into the resources, we can see that we have the Key Vault in this case. So we'll have the Key Vault name. We will deploy this in the shared resource group, and we will also use the template link. As I mentioned, we will use a link, and then we would need that key vault template, and we will need a token to get to it. This is actually generated in a pipeline and pushed in. Otherwise, it's just the name of the key vault. That's all we need. We go down to storage, it's the same. Log analytics, it's the same. Application insights, it's almost the same. In this case, we need to actually know the log analytics namespace. This has a dependency to the log analytics. So we need to know the log analytics name, and we also need to have a depends on. So depends on helps us say that, oh, this cannot be run before the other one is completed. So in our case, we need to have the log analytics namespace created before we can create the application insights. And this is because they are related to each other. And that's about it. So we will create application insight, log analytics, we will create storage account, and we will create key vault in one go. So let's go ahead and look at this from DevOps perspective. So let's just go ahead and go to DevOps. So I actually mentioned this earlier. I broke my demo and I fixed it about half an hour before the session, so that's good. But anyway, so I have some repositories, as I mentioned. I have my infrastructure. My infrastructure is only all these templates that I just showed you. And they're just doing this. I'm actually releasing this in 2. You don't have to do that, but I'm releasing it in 2. So I have the API management is 1 as well. And it's because I wanted to bring them, I wanted to release them in different resource groups. And in any case, I need to create that resource group. So I did 2 releases. So in that particular, maybe we should zoom in. In this one, we create the API management and we do the key vault permission thing. So we actually have this key vault permission part as well. And I'll show you how that looks in the end. When it comes to pipelines, it's a normal build pipeline. I'm only bringing up code and promoting artifacts and so forth. The interesting part is when we come to infrastructure. Because infrastructure in this case only have one stage, as you can see. And we'll zoom in a bit. Let's do something like that. So we only have one stage right now because I want you to be with me when we do next stage. Let's go in and check the tasks. So we have a file blob copy, and this is because we are uploading all the templates that we want to link to ARM. We got the release on shared resources, as mentioned before, and we are adding a few parameters. So we're adding the environment, and then we're adding these SAS tokens and container URI and blob prefix from the blob. We then do the API management, which is the API management master. And in this case, we are sending in the environment as well. That's the only thing we send in here as well. We will create these resources that I talked about. We will actually create the API management instance. We will create, let's just start off with doing this. In this, we have variables to help us out to make this simpler. And we have an environment and a blob prefix. The only thing we need to change actually is the environment. So let's just go ahead and go to the pipeline and clone this one, because now we want to start the releasing things. So let's just go test. There we go. And let's just add this as manual. Save. Okay. And what's happening now is that when we have variables that is connected to a scope, so we have this environment, which is dev, and is connected to a scope in dev. When they are that, they will also create a new one when you clone your previous scope. So in this case, I will just change this to test. And we will have that on test scope, and then we press save. Sounds good. Let's create this release. And I will just ignore the dev one because to save some time. We can just ignore that, and we can go ahead into the release pipeline, and we can just press deploy. So back again, we will execute that 2 master templates, and they will link all the templates, and we will create these 2 resource groups. We will create the test shared resource group, which contains the mlugbear application insight, the key vault, the log analytics, and the storage account. I'm going to show you, in this case, from the dev version, that the access policy thing I was talking about. Since my API management has a managed identity, I can actually link it right here to make sure that it has the select permissions, get, and list. And we will make sure that that's done as well in the release. And we will create this API management instance as well. The test instance will be empty at first because we just released the infrastructure part. But later on, we will populate it with APIs as well. So we will have this API in the test as well further on. So this API, let's just talk a little bit about it, because that's the next thing coming up, is this yellow stuff again. Now it's black. This part is what we want to release next thing. We want to release this order API, and we want to release the function, and we want to connect everything together. That's what we want to do. And in this case, we will go ahead and let's just go and see how this infrastructure goes. Let's see. So it's copying files. That sounds good. You who have been doing this before know that I have 2 resources in this release that can mess this up. I have a key vault and I have an API management instance. Both of these are, when you delete them, they are minimum of 48 hours until they are deleted. And I run this, obviously, this test earlier, so I hope I deleted everything. If I haven't, we have an issue. But then we will sort that out as well, and then you will learn something about that as well, because you can solve that via PowerShell and via REST APIs. Okay, so shared resources went fine. Let's go back to our resource groups over here. Let's go ahead and press test. Look, we have our resource group. We have our test. So everything looks good. We're missing a storage account, I think. Maybe it's there now. There we go. We didn't have a collision with the key vault, at least. Let's hope API management goes as well. Goes good. Let's see. Okay. We should at least have the, let's see, let's press refresh. There we go. The test API resource group. Let's see. Yeah, we got the API test. Nice. So this one should be perfectly clean, perfectly empty. And something that should be done, we should have the managed identity set. Yes, it's on. Perfect. And we should not have any APIs. And we don't. I'm using consumption, by the way, if you are curious how I can release my API management so fast. Because if you're using developer or standard or premium, you will have a 45-minute release time. So, and I won't have time for that in this session. So I'm using consumption, then it goes fast. Next thing up is checking that permission thing that I told you about. So let's just go into our test key vault that is newly created, look into access policies, and making sure, no, we have an error. Interesting. The demo gods are not with me. Well, let's see what it is. So we should go to test shared, I guess, and let's see deployments. And there we go, the test key vault. API service does not exist. Interesting. This could happen if my, let's just do a redeploy on this. This could happen if I have a race condition on my service. Sometimes it's ending a little bit earlier than you actually have it, and then it fails. So what I need to do until next time is find something that will stall the deployment until my resource actually is live. I've been doing that for other resources earlier, but maybe I've been lucky with my API management instance. Nevertheless, we will look into that in a few minutes because this will take some time. So let's look into the other part, where we want to give in some code and we want to give in this API as well. So let's go into our releases again. This is the OAuth or API that we want to have. Let's just bring in what we have in this one, by the way. So our OAuth, let's just up a little bit, has an order function with some code in it. So this is nothing fancy. Let's just open it in Notepad or something. I'm just going to show you. Okay, maybe shouldn't have done that. I'll open it for real. Sorry. There we go. So let's see. While that's loading, I have our order function and I have on template for my function. So this is a template and a master template for my function. As you know, we need to first prepare Azure with a function app, and then we can deploy code to it. And after that, we have a fully released function. And we got the API for orders, which also is a master and an API. So just for simplicity, I'm using master even if I just have one. And that's because if I want to change something in my template, it's easier to do that. So that's okay. Let's just bring in my Visual Studio just to show you. Should have opened this in code, I realize. Okay. This doesn't want to show. Never mind. From my, I actually got my Notepad++ up in a way. So this is just very, very simple things. We're just getting the Cosmos DB and HTTP trigger, and then we either query or we put in data. That's all we do. In Postman, in order to do an example, whoa, that ended up wrong window. Come on, jump up. We have our API management instance, and we have this get token as consumer. And let's get the token. I have a script that saves my token back over here, so I can go and get something called get my orders. And let's just press send, and just verify that we actually get the data back from Cosmos. There we go, we got some data. As I mentioned, very simple. I'm not doing anything extra at all. I'm just reading out data. So let's go back to the release pipeline and press edit. So if we go into tasks, we can see that this is a little bit more complex. As mentioned before, we need to copy files. We will then deploy the function, and so the ARM template for the function to create the function app and everything with that. Then we deploy the code into it, and then we run copy again, and then we deploy the API. I run a PowerShell script to read the key. I'm not needing that anymore because we can do that via ARM, but that's part of this one. So this is also very, oh, sorry, I wasn't meant to go that far. We also have variables. We got a few more. So in this case, we have the Cosmos DB part, we got environment, and we got function name. So this is actually needed in our ARM to get that token, to get that key. I'm going to show you that. But let's just go ahead and create a environment. So let's just clone this one, clone. And let's name it to test. And let's just do manual, so I don't have to wait for that one. And let's go to variables. And we can see again, if we have the scope part over here, we can see a dev test. And the first one, the blob prefix doesn't need to change, so we will just keep that. But in this one, I want to have the test, because otherwise I will release to the wrong environment. And that's not what I want. I want this to be released to my test environment. There we go. So let's just create a release for this one as well. Let's just remove the automated trigger to make this go a little bit faster. And let's just press deploy for test. There we go. So let's just make sure that we actually got a good one. Look, now we have the test key vault. That has been okay. Let's go to our, let's just go ahead and make sure. Master API, there we go. This one was succeeded. So it was that part where the API instance wasn't really ready for connecting to the key vault, but it should be now. And now I'm going into my API management instance. I'm just going to go ahead and say once again, this is empty now. We run the release, so we should have something soon. And test shared, we go to key vault, and we make sure that we have those access policies set up. And we do. So look, now is that test policy set. So this is all done automatically. No manual overlay at all, which is important for me. So this one is working out. Let's just go ahead and look to that template for function. Let's go to the order API, and let's go to order function. Go to ARM template, and go to the template. So we're sending in the Cosmos DB account and Cosmos DB resource group and a bunch of other things. But what's interesting is actually the parts where we do things more. So application instance stands, for instance, we actually get the instrumentation key and the connection string automatically, because we get the instrumentation key and connection string. This is all ARM. ARM is doing everything. Same goes for storage account. We're getting the keys, the account key. So we do there's a list key function for storage account, which makes sure that you can load in the keys as well automatically. And we got the Cosmos connection. And in the Cosmos connection, we also need a key. So there's also list keys on Azure Cosmos. And then you can get by the resource group name and the database account name, we can get the key to actually use this right away. So we don't have to do anything manual there as well. And we don't need to have it stored in Key Vault. We can just, we could have stored it in Key Vault as well, but in this case, we want to read it out on the fly. And then we release the rest of it in this part. So let's see how our release is working out. So it's working, it's going, and let's check it out. Dun, 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 dun. So we are at deploying code. That's good. Then we should see some things popping up over here. So we should see our test orders. Sounds good. Looks good. We can see the function app. We can see the app service plan. We can see the storage account, which is all needed for our function app. If we go in on our function app, we can see that configuration should be set. We should have that Cosmos DB account connection string. We should have everything set up. So Cosmos connection. There we go. So we got the Cosmos connection. Let's just go ahead and do an advanced edit on that one. So as you can see, Cosmos connection, we got the account key going on over here. So that's added automatically from it. Good. This looks good. Let's see. So function code is set. It will now actually do that function key stuff that we don't need anymore. But let's still go ahead and use it anyway. We are now waiting for our API management to get started, and we get something to that. So that's good. We can start preparing. So let's prepare Postman in this case, because this one is now connected to API dev. So let's switch this to API test. Let's verify what we have for variables in this case. So we have an API management key with test API. So we need to switch this key because this key is probably not the same anymore since I created a new one. Let's just go ahead and press send. Either we get an error, or we get a resource not found. That's okay. Just making sure that we're not there. So test API. Good. Let's go back. So deploying API. Sounds good. Let's check out the deployments part. So if you haven't used this deployments part, start doing that because it's awesome. It's a good way to finding errors. You can see what's going on. You can see the steps. As you can see in this case, I have a master template that then loads this test API template, and we can see that they are deploying, or as you mentioned before, we can see these error messages, and they can be better or worse coming information, but still we can see them and we can see what's going on. If we go back to that test share, we had a much better error message, I think. Or is it overwritten? Maybe. Okay. You can actually also go ahead and redeploy stuff. So if you have something that failed, you can actually redeploy them from here as well. I wouldn't do that, but it's possible at least. If you've done something manual in the GUI or something from another template via PowerShell script or something, you can do that. Let's see. Oh, let's look. Our API is done. Let's go back to the test API resource group and let's jump into our. Oh. Is it just me or did it load? Strange. Wrong resources in the group. So let's check out the APIs. We now have our orders, and we now have V1, and we have a bunch of stuff. And as I mentioned before, I won't go through this in deep, but we have a bunch of validations that goes on to auth0. And we have permissions, we got everything, and all this pushed this way. We're reading the values from the token as well in order to set the customer ID. So this is all added in the release, nothing manual, just pushing it in. It's very simple. And also the connection to our function app is done as well. And if you go back to backends, you can see that this is our released backend. And we can see that we have URL set, and we have authentication as well. So in this case, we are using functions key, and it's picked from named values, which is created on the release as well. So in named values, we also have key, and yeah, there's our secret. That's good. So let's just have a subscription. Let's add one. Test order API, and let's use test order API. Let's only have this for the order API. Sounds good. I don't need it. Great. There we go. And we can show hide keys. Let's just copy that key. And let's go to Postman. And let's go to this one. And let's change the API key. There we go. And press send. Unauthorized. Get token. Let's go ahead and do that one. And get my orders. There we go. I wasn't authorized against auth0, so that's good. It had expired. And there we go. I get my orders as well. So now, just to make sure, I'm going to my test API, and if I switch to my dev API, I then go to my dev API, and I will have a completely different subscription key. and it will work from there as well. And I can now switch back to test. There we go. Works like a charm. So in this drawing, we have during this session, these 45 minutes, we have actually managed to do this. We have created all of this. We have created all of this. We have combined it. We have connected API management to Key Vault. We have connected Key Vault functions to Cosmos. We have also connected API management to Application Insight. We have connected Application Insight to Log Analytics. Everything is done automatically on the fly with the help of ARM. And as mentioned, Biceps is just the same, if someone wonders. And yeah, let's jump into my presentation. So I have one more slide. Key takeaways. For me, if you've been working with ARM templates, you know that it's rather complex. It's fast grows out of control, and if you're new to it, it's a lot to be learning. If you use this master template version or the setup, where you use smaller templates for each resource, it's much easier to get started because you don't have to understand so much. As you saw today, I failed on some depends on some loading times and so forth. That's happening. When I build this, I usually add some extra logic on the outputs in order to prevent that. So you can add that to your outputs. That's a good one. And I usually also try to build my pipelines so that they are simple to copy between between environments. So in this case, it was really simple that we looked into because I'm deploying it to the same subscription. If you would need to deploy to a new subscription, you will also need to change the subscription ID as well into the release. But otherwise, try to use variables. I mean, I didn't go into linked variables so much, but I didn't go into that at all. But that's something you can do also. Variable groups, so you can have a whole set of variables that you just swap between environments. So you have one for dev and test and prod because you might want to have SQL passwords or whatever, a bunch of stuff you might need. And that could be then added in a variable group instead. Let's just fast jump out to that because I was really interested to show you now. And let's just go. So that's actually this library where you can create a variable group. Sounds good. And then I can just add API instance environment. Let's add environment and dev. And then I can add API name. I can add dev API, for instance. And then I can link all of this into my pipeline. So if I go to my release, I can then go in and edit, and I can then link in variables. I can go ahead and variable group, and I can link variable groups, and I can pick them. And then I can pick that to a specific stage. I can set that to dev. Then I can clone this variable group and create a test one, and I can link that to the stage of test. And that's how we can make that also very simple to use with this. When you have more variables that you need to manage, or you want to share same set of variables between release pipelines, because you might have multiple and you just want to define it on one place. Then you can just link it here, link it in one by one on each pipeline. Makes it simple and easy. Really good choice. Also, I try to use ARM as much as possible to make sure that I have secrets and I have linking done automatically. Now I use the Cosmos to actually create the connection string inside of the application settings for my function, but I could also do the same, just creating a secret in Key Vault to make sure that I have that secret in Key Vault, and then my function can read that from Key Vault. That would have been almost the same. I just needed to add that create in Key Vault, as a snippet into that template. And that's another way of doing it, but I will still use the same mechanism to actually get that secret every time from Cosmos to make sure that I refresh it if I need, and so forth. Also, as I did with variables, I'm rather putting a little bit more work into my naming standards and creating variables inside of my own template based on environments and stuff like that, rather than creating a more complex structure for my release pipeline, because it makes it so much easier to maintain when I hardly don't need to go into release pipelines and change. I just need to go into templates and swap there. Also makes it easy to copy moving along to next release pipeline as well. So I think that's all for me. Don't forget this swag thing, and let's see if we have some questions.
Yes, thank you, Matthias. That was a really, really good presentation, very good demo. Actually, my heartbeat increased 20 beats because I was so nervous that it might fail. And we can wait a little bit while people come up with the questions. I have actually one from my side, and the question is, in Azure DevOps, there are two types of pipelines that you can build. It's classic, the one that you showed, and then YAML-based or multi-stage pipeline. So what is your experience, and why do you kind of stick with classic if you do?
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite a newbie to the YAML version. I've done it, especially if I actually in GitHub Actions. But I think I've done so much in the whole classic one, and I really like that environment setup that you can do dev test and prod in that way. But it's mostly because I'm more familiar actually.
Yeah. Yes. So I agree, and I just also want to add that so sometimes people they underestimate ARM templates, but you actually show that you can do much more with ARM templates. You can fix permissions in Key Vault. You can, for example, read the managed identity, and so it's a lot of things. Yes, it's a complicated tool, but when you know how to use it, then actually you can achieve a lot with ARM templates. And Bicep, as you said, it's also simplifying things, how you work with ARM templates. So I was really happy that you showed it today. So
nice. I really love it when you dig in some work into it and do it. I mean, divide it and use these things. It's so easy. It makes so simple. You just press release and everything is working. You don't have to worry that you updated your keys in Key Vault, or you don't have to worry that you actually did your variables or whatever it is that usually comes in handy, and you know that it's going to work every single time.
yes,
yeah, I love it. That's the topic.
Yes, excellent. So it looks like it's no more questions from the audience. Thank you very much, Matthias. It was a really good session, and we will continue in 8 hours sharp. Thank you, Matthias.
Thank you, and reach out if you have any more questions that comes along. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Okay, welcome back everyone, and I hope you're enjoying today's Global Azure Norway. For newcomers to the stream, my name is Evgeny, and I'm part of Norwegian.net user group, the organizer of this event, and I will be your host for the session. If you have any question during the talk, please post them to the chat, and I will include them into Q&A session after the talk. With us here now is our next speaker, Lorenzo Barbieri. Welcome, Lorenzo, and the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. So my name is Lorenzo. I'm a cloud solution architect working for Microsoft in Italy, and I want to talk to you about how to protect an hybrid PaaS and IaaS solution built internally in the cloud. Let's start with what we think is a good architecture. We have a subscription with two resource groups, one for dev and test and one for production. In both resource groups, we have a web API, an app service with a web UI. We have a SQL database that is used for the user database and the photo URL. Think about something like an Instagram app or something like that, where you can share your pictures. Then we have a blob storage with all the raw photos and the thumbnails and everything. We have a virtual machine that is used to run a legacy application that is used for watermarking of the photo that cannot run inside the app service. And we have an Azure function that it's used to resize all the pictures when needed. And this is the application that these two friends, let's call them like this, have created. One is the Azure Ninja that is loyal to the application, and the other one is the Evil Genius that is trying to disturb the running of the application, to destroy the application, because it decided to leave the company. And so we will see how we can protect both from external but also from internal attacks. Of course, this is a security session about the cloud. We will not talk about basic security practices, like, for example, code inspection, like, for example, attacks to the SQL database or SQL injection or something like that. We will talk about how to protect our architecture from attacks from inside and outside. The first attack is I know the password for the Azure portal, so I can go there and destroy everything, destroy all the resources. And then I can come back to my friend Azure Ninja and say, oh, I thought that I was deleting the dev and test resource group while I deleted the production one. And sometimes this can also happen in real life. I've seen many companies where IT guys prepared scripts and something like that, and then they forgot to change some parameter, and then they destroyed the wrong resources. So we can see how to protect from this kind of attack. For every attack, we will try to see how to mitigate them and how to remediate them. To mitigate this kind of attack, we can use, for example, infrastructure as a code. So we can use, for example, Terraform or Bicep or an ARM template, where we can describe all of our resources. So when the resources are needed, we can recreate them very quickly. And also we can put in place, for example, policies to prevent some kind of resources to be created or deleted. And also we have some safeguard for the PaaS services. For example, if we delete an Azure web app, we can undelete it. We can enable SQL point-in-time restore. We can enable blob storage restore. Of course, for the VM, we need to have some backup of the disk of the VM before being able to restore it. And of course, we can store our ARM template, for example, in Azure DevOps or GitHub, and we can set up an Azure pipeline or a GitHub action to apply the ARM template to our production and event test resource groups. So in this case, when we apply the mitigation, we can recreate very quickly all the resources, and we can restore from the backups if we have one, if we have set up all the backups, and so our attack is mitigated. How can we remediate this kind of attack so this attack cannot be applied anymore? We can, of course, use role-based access control and at the subscription level, so we can protect our resources, and so we can, for example, give developers access only to the resource group dedicated to the event test, and we can also protect the Azure AD account of the administrator that can access production with a multi-factor authentication, and we can also put in place delete locks on all our resources. And so with this kind of attack, also if I know if I have a valid account, if the protection is well configured, I cannot destroy, I cannot delete the resource, because first I cannot access the production resource group, and then the production resource group and all its resources is protected by delete locks. And also, if I have a username and password for the Azure Ninja account that is the good guy here, it's protected with multi-factor authentication, and I cannot log on. And so this kind of attack can be remediated and mitigated in this way. The second case, the second kind of attack is I know that we have configured auto scale for the app service, and we have unlimited scale for the Azure function, and so I can configure very quickly, for example, some VMs on Azure or on other clouds, or I can buy some kind of distributed denial of service attack on my web UI and my Azure function. On the web UI, it will scale, it will be costly, and then at some point it will go down. And with the Azure function, I will pay a lot of money because I have not put in place a limit on the Azure function. So how can I mitigate this kind of attack? Of course, I can set up alerts, rule, and monitoring, so I can be informed when there is too much load, and I can check if it's coming from the same, for example, the same set of IP. I can set some IP restriction, for example, in the portal or in the web config, or, for example, if my Azure function should be accessible only from the web UI, I can configure the private endpoint, so only the web UI can access the Azure function, and not all the internet IP can access it. And also I can put the Azure function in an app service plan, or I can set up a daily quota, and I can also check with app service diagnostic if my app service is configured correctly. In this way, at least at the Azure function level, the attack is prevented by the private endpoint or by the IP restriction, and when the attack is done on the web UI, I'm informed, so I can take some decision, perhaps by also blocking the IP addresses. A real remediation will be using a real firewall in front of our application. A firewall that can be the web app firewall, the Azure firewall, application gateway, Azure front door, or any third-party firewall that you can use in Azure. And for the Azure function, if you also need the Azure function being accessible from the outside, because, for example, you have sold your APIs to an external company, you can configure API management to protect the Azure function, and so you can easily implement authentication and rules to block the external access from the resources from unwanted users. And so in this case, the attack is the resources are protected, one by the firewall and the other by the API management. Of course, there are other mechanisms in Azure to protect from distributed denial of service attack. For example, the DOS protection for the VNet for some other cases. But if you want an higher level, an higher level of protection, you should use a firewall or the API management in front of the APIs. So this is another attack that we have remediated and mitigated. And as you can see, our architecture, our solution is growing. The number of services that we are implementing is growing very rapidly. But this is the right way to protect our basic application. The third case is I know the password for the SQL database or the blob storage, the tokens for the blob storage, the password for the SQL database, so I can delete the services, or I can delete the data, I can delete all the tables and all the files, and so at some point the web UI will go down because it cannot access all the resources. And in this case, what I can do for a mitigation is, for example, implement in the database the principle of last user privilege. And so, for example, in the database, I can give the permission to delete data only to a restricted set of users and not, of course, to an external user or to the web UI. Also, if the database is implemented not using direct CRUD operation to read and delete and update the data, but the database is in update only mode. So every also if you need to delete a record, you should update it with the flag deleted. You can easily block this kind of behaviors. And so the last user privilege principle on the database is really useful. Also on the blob storage, you can apply the last user privilege, and so give access to delete the pictures only to the right accounts. Of course, you can also set up alerts when a delete operation occurs. And also you can, for example, implement a key rotation mechanism, for example, using an Azure function that every, I don't know, 3 or 5 minutes will change all the keys and will update the config files for the web UI to use the new keys if you need some direct mechanism to store the keys. Of course, a real remediation can be implementing the SQL DB firewall, so only the web UI can access the SQL database in production. Implement the VNet, the storage inside the VNet connected directly to the web UI, so you cannot access from the outside. And or in both cases, you can implement a private endpoint. And with the SQL DB firewall and VNet storage, you can work at the IP level, while with the private endpoint, you only block access to the resources to a specified resource. And also, you can use a managed service identity. Managed service identity is very powerful because it's like the integrated identity inside Windows, where you don't have the real password of the user. With managed service identity, you are storing the tokens used from the web UI inside Azure Key Vault, and you trust the tokens used from web UI, from SQL Server, from, for example, from the storage, from SQL database and from the storage, without knowing the secrets. So it's like the integrated Windows authentication when you're working on a Windows server, but at the cloud level. And it's very powerful. Of course, it can be done. It can be done only if you need the direct access from resources that are in the same subscription. If you need to access the SQL database or the blob storage from the outside, it's important to have the SQL DB firewall to have to store your credential in a secure place. And for example, for the storage, you can implement key rotation, and you can enable VNet access only to the right VNet using a network service group or something like that. Or, for example, a VPN or a direct connection between different VNet. And so, in this case, the attack will be blocked, but Also, if the attack is blocked, you should really think about handling the missing data, handling the disconnect from, for example, from the web UI to the SQL database or the web UI to the blob storage, because in the cloud, you don't know where your app service, where your SQL database, and where your blob storage are. Perhaps they are in the same building, perhaps they are in different buildings, perhaps they are in different zones inside the region. And so perhaps there can be latency, there can be problems that are transient, and so your app should handle these problems perhaps with retries or with other strategies. And at the end, when you have a problem, you should show a nice error screen to the user and not directly the error. Of course, for example, if you want to implement retries, in .NET there are many libraries to do it. The most famous is Polly, that can be used both from .NET Framework, .NET Core, and also .NET 5, and that can be used to apply retry mechanism and policies to SQL database connection, to blob storage connection, and to HTTP connection, and to many other kind of connection to services that can go down also temporarily. So please implement that, because especially if you are migrating a solution from on-premise to the cloud, when you are on-premise, your servers normally are very near, or at least they are two different VMs on the same physical hardware. So normally everything is up or everything is down. In the cloud, you can have something that is up and something that is temporarily down, and so you should handle this kind of problem. Okay, another case, another kind of attack is I've protected all my secrets, but I've stored it in my source control that can be GitHub or Azure DevOps or whatever, and I forgot to protect it from in the source control, and so people can take the keys and use them. And some years ago, this was a very common kind of attack for example, for cloud resources, because there were bots that were scanning, for example, GitHub repositories based that were referring to Azure or AWS or Google Cloud resources. They were scanning the repositories, searching for the keys, because, for example, if they found a key that can be used to create VMs, they created VM and started to mine Bitcoin, for example, or to do other illegal activities. And you can think this is a very strange kind of attack, it's a very stupid kind of attack, but I can be a testimonial for this attack, because after doing one version of this session where I spoke about this kind of attack, I published one of my open source project on GitHub, and I forgot my personal access token for Azure DevOps in clear in my commit. And so I asked to a friend of mine to review my code, and he said, Lorenzo, you forgot your path inside the code, the source code. And so I went immediately to Azure DevOps, I dropped the personal access token, and I changed it, and I removed it from the source control. But I did this session previously, a version of this session previously, and I also was a victim of this attack. Luckily, nobody found my keys, and I immediately removed that, but it could have important consequences, because people with that kind of key, it was a key for an administrator level access to Azure DevOps, so people can destroy project or can create other project or can store files or whatever. And so this attack can be mitigated, can be remediated by moving all the keys to a secure path inside the source control, and use Azure Pipelines or GitHub Action to set them in the right place before deployment only when running inside the agent, or even better, use Azure Key Vault to store all the keys, or even better, when it's possible, use a managed service identity, so you don't need keys, but you create directly the services from your R template, for example, and the services trust them because you tell so. And so this is important because you don't need to store your keys inside the GitHub or Azure DevOps or your private Git or wherever. And remember, this can seem a stupid kind of attack, but I also was a victim of this kind of because it's really easy to forget a token or a secret inside the source code. Of course, for example, GitHub now has protection against this, so you can use GitHub token scanning, and it will scan your commits, and it will block them if they contain secrets that you forgot before doing the commit. And this is really a way to protect from this kind of attack. But the best way is never use keys in production and use key storage like Azure Key Vault or directly the managed service identity. The 5th type of attack is I know that you have a VM and I try to connect to it using SSH or RDP or via PowerShell or via other kind of direct connection mechanism. And this can be done using scripts. And if you try to put online a VM without any protection to use as a honeypot, you will see that in seconds this VM will be starting to receive connection attempts from the internet, from script kiddies or from scripts that are trying to connect to your VM. And so how can you protect from this VM? First, you should use a very strong password, for example, or you can use integrated access using Azure AD and multi-factor authentication. But there are other ways to protect from this kind of attack. First, your machine should be patched and have all the security policies in place. And you, for example, for the virtual machine, you can enable the auto patching if you are using a virtual machine scale set instead of a plain virtual machine. So the scale set can scale up to 2 virtual machine. It can the second one can be patched. The first one can be taken down when it's no longer receiving a request. And you can use Azure Security Center to check the status of your VMs, but Azure Security Center can also be used to check app services, blob storage, SQL, AKS, and many networks and many other kind of Azure resources. So I really suggest that you go to Azure Security Center from time to time, and that you go there and enable alerts from the Azure Security Center, because it's the best way to keep your services protected. And of course, a way to remediate this kind of attack is, for example, implementing a private endpoint, so only the web UI can access the VM, or to implement a VNet with network security groups, and if you need to give access to this VM also to other services. And also, if you block completely the VM, you can use the Azure portal to connect to it and to manage the VM. So you don't need to create your own proxy VM to connect to the real one, but you can do this in the Azure portal. So you can really lock the VM to accept a request only from the trusted sources, but continue to administer it using connecting via the Azure portal. And this is really a good feature for protection. Okay, so A better architecture will be something like this. And this is, let me say, it's not perfect. You can add many more services, and we have not talked about the quality of your code, the design of your code, the quality of your SQL database and whatever. I'm only talking about general rules to protect a simple, because as you can see, there are very few services, a simple web application. But also with a simple web application, you can implement many, many layers of protection. And so to recap, the 7 golden rules for the cloud securities are script everything, backup everything, less user privilege in every sense, so network security group, private endpoints, role-based access protection, and whatever. Trust no one, because the attack can come from inside. For example, with Azure Monitor Application Insight, you can monitor and you can set up alerts. And if you don't trust your monitor infrastructure, you can stream your logs to another service that it's not under your control to keep all the logs and keep everything. Assume cloud failure, because the cloud can fail at least temporarily in every moment because of the many latencies that can be at some point, and so your app should behave correctly also in this case, and protect your secret from everybody, including yourself. And it's even better if you don't have any secret, like for example in the using the managed service identity. Okay, but this is what we can do to protect our application. But what is doing Microsoft to make Azure more secure so we can trust it? And so there are many levels of security for Azure. The first is the physical data center security. So everyone that should access the data center will be checked from background. They will do a system check, so they will check everything from him or from her, and so it should be trusted. You have perimeter fencing. You have only one access point at the end. You don't have many entrance gate for the data center. Only one access point, video coverage everywhere, and roaming patrols. To access the building, you have two-factor authentication with biometrics. Buildings are not, you don't know, looking at the building, this is the building for the app service, this is the building for the VMs. Every machine, every router, everything has a code, but you don't have a legenda to know what this code means. Only people that have the description of the code can go and know where your data is stored, and this can be done only from very restricted set of personnel. As I said before, ongoing roaming patrol. Every person will be checked, and every person should that should access the data center is checked. All the days, 24/7, all the year. You cannot go there at Christmas and think to enter the data center. And of course, all the environments are protected, and it's not possible from the data center to know where the data for the customer are stored, and if needed, the data from the customers can be encrypted in many cases using keys that are not under Microsoft control but under customer control. And also, when we need to destroy hardware, we use secure destruction bins, so the unused hardware will be securely destroyed, and data cannot be retrieved from there. There are many other services. I'm just you have storage service encryption, disk encryption, SQL Server is always encrypted. If you need encryption for live data inside the RAM and the processor of your VMs, you can use Azure Confidential Computing, and you can, as I said, you can keep your keys in hardware, and you can use Key Vault and everything, and so everything is protected using keys, and you can choose and use your own keys without giving them to Microsoft, and this is really important. And we spoke about before about the Azure Security Center. Azure Security Center is a tool that's used to protect Azure from many thousands of different kind of attacks, both from attacks that we detect and for attacks that we create, because we have the red and blue teams inside many laboratories in Microsoft, where a red team, for example, is trying to attack and the blue team is trying to defend, and they then exchange the role. And wherever they discover a new vulnerability, or they discover a new kind of attack, or they analyze the logs for successful or unsuccessful attack, they try to understand patterns from the log, and also we apply machine learning, artificial intelligence to all the logs. All this knowledge is every day it's added to Azure Security Center. So Azure Security Center is really the focal point for securing your solution running inside Azure. Also, for the app service specifically, you can also go to the app service diagnostic page, and where you can troubleshoot your apps, and especially you can set up the security for your apps, and this is really important because you can do it in an easy way. And I'm a little bit in, I run too much perhaps because I'm not used anymore to speak in English, so perhaps I'm a little bit early, but the session is finished, so you can claim your attendee learner badge here. If it's not working, there are many other badges available. You can ask the organizer, but I think that this QR code should work. And you have also the free offer for 30 days to learn. And there is also other swag available at the Global Azure website. And so these are my contacts, and you can connect with me on LinkedIn. And of course, I will stay here for the rest of the time, or at least for some time, to answer the question that you may have. Sorry for finish early, but I'm not used anymore to do session in English, so perhaps I ran too much because of it's not my first language, but I hope that you enjoyed the session. And if you have any question, you can ping me if you want any suggestion, or if I will publish the slides in the next days, and I will also share the link with the organizer so they can share the slide with you. Thank you very much. And
yeah, thank you, Lorenzo. Don't be stressed. So it was perfect presentation. It's very well structured. I learned a bunch, and yeah, so it was very good. Security is important, and it was very well presented. We can wait a little bit for the questions from the people. I have actually one question from my side. You mentioned that GitHub has this token scanner. So yeah. Do you know if Azure DevOps have or planning to have similar feature?
I really don't know because I take a look at the Azure DevOps as a feature roadmap, and I haven't seen anything like that implemented. I know that there are some plugins inside the marketplace that can do this kind of scanning, but I really don't know if they plan to implement it. I haven't seen it in the feature timeline the last time that I checked, because it was also interesting for me. But knowing that for GitHub is available for public repos and is available inside the advanced security tab, I don't know if they will port it to Azure DevOps actually.
Okay. Yep. Thank you. Another question that I have, that you mentioned, I think it was fifth strike that you described to get access to the VM from the portal. Is that the Bastion product that you can use?
It's the Azure Bastion. I didn't put the name inside the slide, but it's the Azure Bastion feature that is really useful, because you don't need to set up another VM borderline between your VNet and the internal VNet that can access but you can use Azure Bastion directly from the portal.
Yeah, thank you. Cool. So I don't see any more questions. So then I think we can say thank you, Lorenzo. It was a very good session. And that was the last session for today. So thank you very much for attending, and have a nice evening.
Have a nice evening. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.